Robert,
Hi.
many thanks for accepting my invitation to answer the five good or good questions. Robert
Thank you.
Coons. Robert Coons. Before diving into the question, I will try to present you briefly. Don't hesitate to correct me if I'm wrong. I wanted to thank a French Daoist friend who proposed me your name, François Ducoter. Uh, Salut, François. So, Robert, you are a practitioner of Daoist Internal Alchemy meditation with around 13 years experience. That's what I read. You are currently living near Toronto and have lived off and on in China for the last decade, studying Chinese language, philosophy, meditation, Qigong, the internal martial arts, and tea culture. Your pedigree as a practitioner of Daoist arts mainly comes via your teacher, Hai Yang, a leader figure in the Chinese internal martial arts community and lay disciple, sorry, in English, of Daoist meditation, who studied under many well-known masters, including Cao Zhenyang. That's right, the
Cao Zhenyang.
pronunciation. Cao
Cao.
Zhenyang. He was the past abbot of the White Cloud Temple in Beijing. You wish to bring these wonderful practices back to the West and share with as many people as possible. I hope we will contribute through this interview in spreading a little bit more your this culture and this arts, we can say. To do that, you are the author of a book called Internal Elixir Meditation: The Nature of Daoist Meditation, which was published in 2015. And you are also running a blog called Immortality Study, which is the study of becoming a Xianren, Xianren, or immortal human being in English. For those willing to become immortal, and we'll probably see what that means in my third question. You can subscribe to the mailing list by clicking on the link, sorry, just below in the description. Robert, I just wanted to add one important question for me, because I know the Ninja Turtles were very important in your childhood, especially they play the role of, we can say, a first gate maybe to the Asian culture, or one of the gates. What was your favorite Ninja Turtle?
Uh, that shifted around a little bit depending on my age, but I have to say, maybe at that time it was Michelangelo. And
Okay,
then as I get older, I think I like Leonardo better.
okay. Michelangelo was the red one?
Well, now you see you've caught me.
Yeah.
I think he was the red one, but who was the orange one?
The Raffaello, maybe. I'm not sure, but I think that's what I have in mind. I also watched a lot of Ninja Turtles when I was a child. I think we may have maybe around the same age together.
I was
Uh,
partial to Master Splinter. I always thought Master Splinter was really cool.
yeah. My favorite was Donatello,
Oh
if I
yeah,
remember
yeah,
well.
the purple.
The purple one, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. He does the staff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Robert, do you want to add anything more before switching to the questions for your introduction?
Oh, I do. Yes, I want to thank Francois very much, and also Francois Salud.
All right. So now, first question, Robert, does life has a meaning?
Well, I thought about this a little bit. I made some notes for this interview after watching the first English language interview.
Yeah,
My French is not good enough to really make sense of the French language interviews, so I was
no
lucky.
worries.
I was lucky to have someone before me, and it was a very nice interview too, with an excellent Taoist disciple in Wudang. So I believe that we have to separate this question into two categories. The first category would be, does life have a purpose in the sense of something that we must do? So something that we must do, if we were to maybe use Maslow's hierarchy as an example of, let's say, a taxonomy of things that we absolutely have to do to survive, up to things that we do that cause us to feel liberated as human beings, then I think we have to admit, all, of course, that we do have some essential drives that are required, and these perhaps are outside of meaning. We maybe grow meaning on top of them, but a purpose of life, of course, is to be fed, to be housed, to have those basic requirements that we need, and ideally also to have other human beings that we love and care about surrounding us. So we perhaps could say that this is a required purpose of life. But then when we talk about purpose on an individualistic level, then my personal belief, because I'm not a very good Taoist, I'm really more of a postmodernist. My personal belief is that actually that which gives us meaning and that which gives us purpose is highly subjective. Because when you talk to many people and you see the way that different people live, inevitably, I think you will find that the things that they value are quite different. And yet they still place the same level of emphasis on their values, the same level of faith, the same level of determination. And all of those things come together to produce different social groups, different cultures, which I hope to say are all legitimate in their own way. Maybe some things we can't all agree on, but at least we can say most humans have a legitimate right to their understanding of reality. And insofar as that's concerned, then these things are perhaps not essential, but instead are values that we create ourselves. And in that regard, I would say that I can definitely agree that yes, there is a purpose that's innate to all human beings. Um, but then the purposes that we ascribe to life could be variable, and as a result of that, I can't say with any kind of definite stance that this is all legitimate or not.
All right. Thank you. And did you find your own uh, meaning or purpose in life?
Well, I can say that I've found a number of purposes which are small but important, and then perhaps a larger purpose. I like this way of explaining it. It's not my way, but it's the way that my teacher had described it to me. And he uses the concept of the Tao, which is the central idea of Taoism. He said that in his life, he understands the Tao to be something, some principle in the center of his life, which is intangible. We don't know precisely what the principle of life is, but we know that there's something that governs us from our center, and that our consciousness and our life and our energy always revolves around this central governing principle. But since we can't touch it, it's so hidden, then what we have to do instead is find indirect ways to get energy from it and also to feed it. And so he said that the way that he organizes his life is to center his practices around this ineffable, intangible principle in the center of his life, so that the practices are fed by his lifestyle, and yet at the same time they feed his lifestyle, and they all end up in an inexorable chain that's linked together, even though he may, focus on nutrition and cooking for his children when he's not practicing martial arts, and he may, meditate at a different time and so on. And they don't seem to have any direct connection. And yet, at the end of the day, they're all profoundly connected by this central life principle. So I have a tendency to adopt that principle because I think that it's a beautiful way to understand the world, and also a very helpful and very positive way to understand the world. So ultimately, I've been very thankful over the years, increasingly thankful that I was lucky enough to have somebody to show me how to, not to think for me, but to organize my thoughts so that I could be more able to think for myself and better understand life.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for your this. Great answer. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Second question, Robert. God for you is.
Oh, well, this is also an interesting question. And I think from my perspective, it's very important to stay humble about this because I grew up in Canada, and Canada is, when I was a child at least, was a Judeo-Christian country for the most part. Of course, there were many, many different groups of people at that time and different types of religion and flavors of religion. And when we went to kindergarten and grade school, we had some people who were also Hindus and Muslims and many, many different faiths. But broadly, I would say our culture at that time was Judeo-Christian. And I think that growing up in that environment, we always had a sense that God was what's the word that they use? Kaiaphatic? There's two different types of view of God. One is apophatic, where we view God
Yeah,
as
yeah,
intangible, and then the other is viewing God as actually tangible in some way because God
yeah.
intercedes in lives of
Cataphatic,
humans,
yeah, cataphatic, yeah,
right? Yeah. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
I grew up thinking that I was exposed perhaps to a lot of different ideas as a young person. My father was very interested in all kinds of philosophy, but especially Eastern philosophy. And I think eventually I grew up thinking that this was quite a unreasonable idea, that there should be this God who was once visible to the people of the Middle East in some specific places and contexts, but then seems to have disappeared for quite a long time and only very directly intercedes in our lives through faith. And so I kind of soured on this idea of God for a long time. But and I think this is true of many people, as I got older, I began to look into the ideas of the Judeo-Christian, especially the founding fathers of the Catholic Church, more seriously. And I discovered this idea of apophasis through thinkers like Pseudo-Dionysius, for instance. And what I came to, I think, initially, because the Taoism, in a certain sense, has this same apophatic tendency. The Tao is seen as unknowable. We already have mentioned this, but it's the cosmic principle which generates all things. And so, in that sense, if you were to look at, oh, I don't know, like Genesis, for instance, especially if you read it in Hebrew, it has quite a tendency toward being able to be understood in a way where the precondition of the universe is totally unknown, and then it generates the universe, and we don't have the ability to view it directly. So my sense coming out of that view and being influenced by Taoism was that, well, perhaps God is something that we can experience when we're outside of our regular thinking minds, or we go into a certain state, especially a meditative state. And I believe that Meister Eckhart called it the ground of the soul. And
Okay.
so the idea being that this is the deepest part of the soul where God's light is able to shine through, but perhaps we don't actually interact with God itself. But then going beyond that, I had another thought, which is if God really is the primary creator of the universe, and I'm just putting that out as a possibility because I haven't made up my own mind about this, but if God really is the primary creator of the universe, the universe is really terribly large and it's been going on for quite a long time, and we don't know what happened before. And so it seems really shocking to me to imagine that we could even get a fraction of that in any kind of way that would be able to be understood by us. So I have to ultimately take a position which is more radical than apophasis, which is just to say, I really think it's too big of a question for me, and I'm sorry that I couldn't answer it better.
As a good Taoist, I think you gave a humble answer. Um, do you have personally a relationship? Like, do you do some prayers to that Tao?
No, I'm totally secular, but I will mention something which is of some importance. This concept of Taoism initially, as I think, as far as the scholars understand, initially before about one 100 CE approximately, Taoism was probably largely a philosophical school of thought, and then I think a common belief, I'm not sure it's entirely accurate, but a common belief is that it mixed with indigenous Chinese folk religions, and that the worship of various deities from Taoism, such as Lao Tzu, right, the author of the Tao Te Ching, whose religious name is Taishang, um, this sort of came up as a result of folk traditions interacting with Taoist philosophy. But ultimately, Taoism, throughout most of its history, has been expressed as a religion, and there's many, many deities in Taoism. Many of them are regional deities, and many of them are also people who have supposedly ascended beyond the mortal coil and live in the ether and so on. And I think this is all very nice, but the school of Taoist practice that I come from doesn't have priests, and it doesn't have any religious officials. Actually, it's a totally secular school, and it was founded by a person who largely rejected the Taoist religion.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Third question, the biggest question for me, uh, about the afterlife. Is it a stop or an again?
Well, I don't know, but
I don't know either.
yeah.
That's what.
But
Yeah,
it would be interesting. Perhaps we can talk about it from the perspective of Taoism, though, and I'll give a few of my thoughts too.
yeah,
Um, so initially, again, most Taoist ideas about spirituality, including the afterlife, they come from older, pre-existing Chinese religious or cultural, I should say, attitudes. And so in Taoism, because I'm sure we want to talk about what an immortal is, this concept of immortals actually, in a literary sense, we know that the first mention of it comes from a book called the Shanhai Jing. Shan means mountain, Hai means sea, and Jing means classic. So the Shanhai Jing was a book of stories about things that happened, in the outer lands surrounding that at that time. What was, it wasn't China at that time. It was a group of different states. But outside of those states, there were all these kind of wildlands. And so people speculated about what might be out there. And sometimes there were big monsters living in caves, but there was supposed to have been a country of undying people. It was called the 不死人之国, right? The country of people who don't die. And later on, this sort of was absorbed into other types of folk belief and Taoism, and we get a couple of different streams looking at what's supposed to happen when you die, because Taoism is an old tradition, 2,500 years plus. And so initially, they don't have a great answer for that. They kind of say, well, we can attain longevity and we can become like a child again, but that doesn't mean that you live on or live forever or anything. But at one point, the Taoists came to the belief that actually, if they cultivated their bodies using particular types of exercises and breathing practices and nourishing the fluids of their bodies and eating various types of medicines, plant medicine and alchemical medicine, that they could actually protect their bodies and cause them to ascend to the heavens. And so you can see some old books like the Record of the Immortals. It's called Lie Xianjing in Chinese. And you have all these different stories about people who had meticulous virtue and self-cultivation skills. And some of them ascend in broad daylight, and some of them, one doctor who fixed the tooth of a dragon was carried away to the heavens by the dragon. And one very pious family ascended with their entire house from the top of a mountain. And you have these kind of stories, and this is still persistent actually in South China. You can go to various mountains where there were. I went to one in Quanzhou in Fujian province where a doctor had was collecting herbs for the local people of the community, and he fell off a cliff and died. And so they say that he became immortal as a result of the deities smiling on him for sacrificing himself for the people. A very beautiful cultural story. But eventually, the Taoists who practiced alchemy, internal alchemy, I should say, meditation, um, they came across the problem, of course, that people tended to die. And if you don't make it to the mountain retreat fast enough and you die in front of your disciples, that could be a big problem if they believe that you're going to ascend. And you can only make up stories to legitimate that for so long. So people started talking about this idea of shijie, which means corpse emancipation. So the spirit would leave from the corpse after death. And then later, the Taoist meditation masters in the internal alchemy tradition, they came up with the idea that the spirit could be fortified. And if you fortified the spirit, it's a kind of spiritual energy that ultimately it could merge with nature itself. And so after the death of the human body, it could leave through the top of the head, and it could reside in the heavens in a sort of permanent fashion. And I've always been skeptical of this. My spirit hasn't popped out of the top of my head yet. I'm farther along toward that goal than I was a few years ago, but still it hasn't bloomed out of the top of my head yet. And I do believe that that's something which the feeling of the energy or spiritual awareness leaving the body is entirely possible, and it can be controlled by people who are very skilled. But what that means about what happens to us after we die, I'm not entirely sold on it. And then at the same time, I think that I also don't see, I don't know whether it's possible or not because I just don't know all the secrets of reality pertaining to those things. But if it were possible, I suspect that what lives on is the energy. I don't think that it's our thoughts and our attitudes and those things, because if you want to meditate successfully in that context, you have to completely clear your thoughts and your attitudes and those things. Those things are all the things that hinder our progress in meditation. So if it meant living on, after death meant living in a state of constant clarity, then the question is that the same or different from nothingness? And so this is a persistent question for me, and if I ever get the answer to it, and I do happen to become an immortal, and you're still around, I'll make sure I come down and show you what it's about in a dream.
All right. Good answer. Thank you, Robert. Well, now we have two more questions that are maybe a bit less heavy. Fourth question: a spiritual character who inspired you.
Well, it's really interesting because I have I have a persistent question recently. This is maybe the last 2 or 3 years, maybe even less. And the problem that I've found is that I used to be able to tell you this answer very easily, but then I found this issue, which is that when you meet people, sometimes you can meet people who are very, considered to be very high level spiritual people, whether they're Buddhists or Taoists or Christians or whatever. But of course, if we practice one of these arts that focuses on meditation, then we would usually say, well, you can, in a tradition, they can objectively say when somebody is enlightened. But I met somebody who was said to be enlightened once in one of the Buddhist traditions, and it was really cool, and I think he might have made me have a very interesting spiritual dream through chanting. But then I found out later that he had been in a flame war on the internet, fighting with another lama. They were both lamas about this some of his students going to the other teacher, and they had set these two enlightened lamas. So this caused me to think for a little while, what does it really mean to be highly spiritually advanced and enlightened? So the way that I look at it now, and again, this is very much contingent, I think, on my teacher's. I don't know if it's my teacher's view. I know that it's what he is my interpretation of what he communicated to me. I tend to look at people who can help many other people through a difficult situation as being personal heroes. And so, in that sense, I might look at Nelson Mandela. Would be a great spiritual hero of mine. But of course, in the Taoist tradition, I'm very partial to Chen Yingning, who was the founder of the tradition that I study. And what he did, I think, of great value was he he saved Daoist meditation practices from almost inevitable obscurity during a time when Chinese people were really questioning their traditional culture because of the incursions of Western nations and Japan against them. So during a time when China was suffering culturally a great deal and people were abandoning traditional culture, Chen Yingning spent his entire life to research and study and practice and promote the Taoist arts. And him and his disciple Hu Haya were very foundational in keeping internal alchemy alive. So I really respect him a lot because without his work, I think it would be almost impossible to study these things today.
Mhm. Thanks to him. If he was not here, we couldn't have this interview today, in a sense. Um, Last question, fifth question. A book and or a movie to recommend to your best friend who may be quite lost in these questions.
Well, I might recommend different books or different movies to different people depending on what they need. The Buddhists have the saying, skillful means. So you look for what a person needs and then you try to help them along those lines. But I think if it were a person who were interested in Taoism, I might be able to answer that question. And I think I would recommend to people actually that they could read two books, I think, at the same time, and one of them would be the Tao Te Ching, which is the most prominent classic of Taoist philosophy. The other one would be The Great Study, which is by Zisi. Zisi is the nephew of Confucius, and he really plainly states sort of the centralizing concept of Chinese metaphysics and social philosophy. And I think that those things, yeah, of course, we have perhaps some similar books in the Western canon as well. But those are books that really spoke to me, and they have a relationship which is similar to yin and yang. The Tao Te Ching is very, creating action through non-action and observing things in order to understand how they work and not making a decision until you know how something works. And Confucianism is about understanding our value in society and making sure that we live up to the requirements of our relationships. And so but it generates harmony through correct action. So some balance of those two things, I think, could be very medicinal for somebody who's trying to find their own way in the world.
So the other book was the Great Study of the Great Learning. I found the Great Learning.
You could call it
It's
either.
the
Its
same.
Chinese name is
Yeah.
Da Xue. Da means
Okay.
big and Shui
All right.
means for learning.
Yeah, it's the same book. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. And the movie. I'm always in search of movies to share.
Goodness. Well, let me think about that. I'm not a great cinephile.
Neither do I.
But and unfortunately, all the movies I like are a little bit macabre.
Oh yeah.
Growing up, I loved being John Malkovich and The Big Lebowski, but those are not good for finding your way at all. I think actually maybe those are better for losing your way. So, um,
Maybe
I'm
sometimes you have to lose your way to find it again.
Yeah, yeah, it could be. Well, and the other thing, if I can say one more thing about this is that I really would like to encourage people to enjoy their lives and don't let spirituality is very important in our lives, but it's possible to let spirituality actually dampen your life instead of making it better. And
Yeah.
so you have to make sure that you balance those spiritual qualities like self-control and temperance and all of these things also with taking care of yourself and having a nice time and being around people you like, and all of these different things. So maybe you should watch, especially The Big Lebowski, because it's pretty funny, and
Yeah.
enjoy yourself while you try to become an immortal.
Thank you, Robert. The end of the interview. Do you want to add anything more, like I don't know, you missed during the interview or anything else?
Well, I do want to thank you very much. And another thing is, um, I'd like to also give a special shout out to a couple of people. Maybe also you could think about talking to them because they're wonderful. Um, Josh Painter and Jack Schaefer at Parting Clouds Daoist Education. I'd like to especially mentioned them, as well as Annie Pecheva, who runs a blog called the Blog of Annie Pecheva, are people in the Taoist community who I really deeply respect. And so for my last word, I'd like to give a friendly hello to them, and recommend, of course, that you can go check them out, because
Yeah.
what I'm doing in meditation is very specific, and it's a very small part of Taoism. Parting Clouds are doing the religious education part, and Annie is the greatest modern. I don't know if she could be called. I think she's Occidental. She lives in Bulgaria, but I think she's the greatest European Taoist person alive today. So definitely worth checking her out.
You answered again the fourth question, so
Sorry about that.
no,
Because
no, it's
I
good, it's
my
good, it's good.
what do they call it?
Yeah,
The mind connection, that's
I will check it, and I hope being able to maybe to interview this woman, Annie. You told me, yeah? Right?
yeah, I'll
Okay.
send you her information.
Yeah, thank you. By email, if you can send me the names you just quoted,
Sure.
it would be great. Thank you, Robert, again. Thank you,
Thank you.
all people that will be able to hear this interview, and see you soon.
Okay, see you. Take care.